Hello, this is DC Hammer, and this is the DC Hammer Show. So the New American has published an article, Pakistani Christian woman acquitted of blasphemy is kept from leaving country. And this is again on Asia Bibi. Now Asia Bibi, 9 years ago, was accused of blasphemy for the crime of being out picking berries with some Muslim women. And the Muslim women then insulted her and told her that she needed to convert to Islam. After a while, the Bibi got fed up with the insults and told them that she was not going to convert. And she said that she believed in her religion and in Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for her and the sins of mankind. And just asked what the Prophet Muhammad ever did to save mankind and why they, the people that were insulting her, shouldn't convert instead. For that, she was arrested, convicted of blasphemy. That carries a death sentence in the country of Pakistan. And for 8 years, she languished on death row, waiting her fate, separated from her children and her husband, who then immigrated to Canada. And finally, a 3-judge panel reviewed her situation, agreed with the lower court that she was not guilty of blasphemy. And I know this will be a shock that the case against her was riddled with false evidence and perjured testimony. Sounds kind of like an American trial against the Bundys in Nevada, something like that. What do you think? Anyway, so the judge ordered her release, and that was months ago, and I reported on this before at the time, but they were going to prevent her from leaving the country, even though she has been released by the court, acquitted by the higher court. But apparently, the whole purpose of keeping her is twofold. One, there were riots when she was acquitted, and Muslims in the street were brandishing signs calling for her immediate execution, even though she had been acquitted. And the Pakistanis, on the other hand, in addition to wanting to keep her there, that maybe these protesters that really believe that she should be dead will fulfill that desire. Secondarily, it appears that Pakistan doesn't want her to leave the country, because if she does, goes to a free country with a free press. And I know that's not Canada, but it is better than where she is. She may be able to say at least a few words in Canada. Of course, she's got to be very careful about what she says about Islam in Canada as well. She may not be as harshly treated, but just ask Mark Steyn. She better watch her step. But she is starting to suffer from some medical complaints. She has very low blood pressure. She's not getting the medical treatment she needs. She is, again, remaining in Pakistan. They just won't let her out of that country. And so even though she's faced all of these trials over the last 9 years, the incarceration, separation from her family, chances are higher rather than lower that if she were to be released and go to Canada to be reunited with her family, she would merely then just peacefully live out the rest of her life, forgive the people who treated her this way, for that would be what Jesus Christ would ask her to do. The Geller Report brings us another headline that perks interest. Islamic State Jihadi. What is our guilt? What is our crime? We just wanted to apply the Sharia of Allah. So once again, as the incursion of Islam into the Western world, the European Union and the United States continues to escalate, as now we have some new members of Congress that have some interesting backgrounds, some interesting opinions on people of other faiths, and some interesting directions, it appears, in where they're going to try to steer the Democrat Party, as the Marxist screaming media and members of the Democrat Party continue to refuse to face up to the realities of Islam and what it means when you accept jihadis into your culture. There was a question about whether the Islamic State, as it's now being brought under control in Syria, it's almost over there. Their desire for a caliphate has now been completely crushed. It was started under the previous administration with, some people suspect, the help of no-name Lindsey Graham, Barack Hussein Obama, and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. But certain pundits continue to question whether ISIS was truly an Islamic State that was going to apply Sharia, and they continue to try to paint the false narrative that it's actually a movement not based in the tenets of the Quran. But if you are to believe the statements of the actual people on the ground in that remaining stronghold in Syria, the area of Idlib that is now within days should be completely eradicated of ISIS forces, it would appear that the suspicions that these people do believe that they are acting on orders that they have taken from the words of the Quran is the case, as in these last few days they are saying, tomorrow we'll be in paradise and we will be burning in hell. So we, the infidels, according to them, have laughed at them and humiliated them, not like the Islamists in Pakistan were laughing at and humiliating Asia Bibi. It only works one way. I'm sure that that wasn't the case. So Al-Azim says that all ISIS wanted to do was to apply God's law. Why are we bombed by planes? Why do all the nations of the unbelieving world come together to fight us? What is our guilt? What is our crime? We just wanted to apply the Sharia of God. Sounds innocent to me. After all, as long as you're not a Christian, you're allowed to practice your faith in any way that you see fit. The Epoch Times is reporting that as Bob Mueller reaches his inevitable conclusion, Trump is primed to respond, according to Brian Cates. Mr. Cates believes that in the next several weeks, as the Mueller investigation winds down, as the Nothing Burger is revealed, as there's no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, that people will begin to bend over backwards to not own up to their false claims that they have projected for the last 2 years, will continue to peddle their fake stories and even then just push the narrative from collusion to all kinds of other made-up events as they continue their quest over 2 years now in search of a crime. But as Mr. Cates points out, that the conclusion that U1 Bob made was inevitable since there was nothing there to begin with. And he kind of spins this in a new direction that I think has some validity. There's a very strong chance that while this was all going on, again, there was a meeting the day before Bob Mueller was appointed as special counsel. The meeting was between Rod Rosenstein, Bob Mueller, and Donald Trump in the White House. And the assumption was that this was a discussion about who should become the replacement FBI director after Rod Rosenstein had provided a document to President Trump indicating that James the Leaker Comey should be fired. And when President Trump took him up, Rosenstein, on that recommendation, then the narrative immediately became that President Trump had no basis to fire Comey. Of course, this is after both the Marxist screaming media and the Democrats had also raised their voices in support of getting rid of Mr. Comey, who they became disenchanted with after in the summer of 2016, after he exonerated Hillary Clinton for no reason, overstepping his authority, and saying that even though she had mishandled emails on her server and allowed it to be breached, that in his opinion, no judge would actually in court take her to task for that. And so he took it upon himself. Would have been the Attorney General's responsibility, not the Director of the FBI's responsibility to make that call. But shortly after that, he got cold feet as other issues, and I believe we'll know exactly what the basis of this turnabout was later that same year before the election. Comey came out and once again said that that matter needed to be reviewed, and that's what spun all the Democrat heads in a circle. But what Mr. Cates believes is that President Trump has held back the classification because he had to wait until U1 Bob actually provided his final report to the Attorney General. In this case now it's William Barr, and that Trump has been trolling all these months the media and the Democrats into a frenzy, making them be the ones to demand that it's released when actually it's President Trump who will be the biggest beneficiary of the Nothing Burger being revealed. And as the Mueller report ends, his final report is given to Barr. There is no Trump-Russia collusion. Is it possible, and this is where you take the next step with the thinking that Brian Cates is presenting here, that this whole time in this 2 years, there have been parallel investigations going on. The ones that are unknown to us because there's been absolutely no leaks are the ones that are based on fact, that these hundreds of government lawyers that have been on the task beyond the 12 angry Democrats that Mueller hired and was pursuing Trump. There have been hundreds through Huber, that Inspector General Huber, that have been doing parallel investigations, and that they will be based on true evidence. They will expose the true dealings of the deep state. It will not be President Trump who's going to be held to task for the results of that information coming forward, that as these indictments are unsealed, they will go straight through the court system instead of being released to the newspapers, or they will be released in official Department of Justice announcements, once again cutting the Marxist screaming media out of the loop, as the Democrats that have been involved in this process, the deep state, has inserted them to ensure that the proper spin was put on their lies and false accusations and fake news. This is going to be, and if Brian Cates has pulled this together properly and connected the right dots, this will then be the revelation of all of the wrongdoing on the other side, what's been going on with Hillary Clinton and the Democrats, and who knows how that will lead to convictions or indictments and convictions in court. The other thing to keep in mind at the same time is that General Michael Flynn has once again asked the court to delay his sentencing because he continues to cooperate with ongoing investigations. And as it's impossible to believe that that would mean that he's cooperating with Mueller regarding the Trump-Russia false narrative, that in reality they're concluding their investigations into the other matters, the matters against the people that have truly committed the crimes. Can you say Hillary Clinton? We will find out. And what Brian Cates is saying, though, that the Mueller investigation needs to end, the report needs to go to Barr, these other investigations would continue, indictments would be presented to courts and presented to the DOJ, and a proper action would be taken. Those indictments then would be used in order to bring some of these people before a judge and start the process of prosecuting their crimes. This dovetails very nicely with a lot of the drops that's been coming out from Q-Team lately. And Q-Team has been on fire with a lot of posts, with a lot of extra detail and questions, and pointing citizen journalists in new directions to connect dots and to be ready for what is to come. And once again, Q-Team's predictions fall in line with what Brian Coates is talking about, and it could be a very interesting rest of March, which Q-Team is calling March Madness. The Daily Signal is reporting through an article with a headline, Ocasio-Cortez blames pipeline that hasn't been built yet for an oil spill. So the other day, Ocasio-Cortez, who's on one of the committees in Congress, had the opportunity to ask questions of the CEO of Wells Fargo Bank. And Wells Fargo provides financing for a variety of projects. Corporations go to banks like Wells Fargo and ask for money to be used in order for them to build things and do things. And Ocasio-Cortez, in her questioning, talked to the CEO of Wells Fargo, Timothy Sloan, and asked him specific questions about issues that she believed involved the Keystone XL pipeline. She made the accusation that that pipeline was responsible for leaking 5,000 barrels of oil in rural South Dakota 2 years ago. There's only one problem. The Keystone XL pipeline has not been built yet. So even though Ocasio-Cortez claimed that, and here's a quote, Keystone XL in particular had one leak that leaked 210,000 gallons across South Dakota. Once again, one big problem is you can't leak something out of something that hasn't been completed, and the oil is not flowing through the pipes. So how could it spill out of that? And what's going on is she has confused the Keystone XL pipeline with the Keystone pipeline. So it sounds like a minor mistake, but you probably want to have your ducks in a row before you grill the CEO of a lender about his practices when it comes to loaning monies to companies that are building things. But you see the direction that she's trying to head with this now. Let's say that the Democrats like Ocasio-Cortez are able to hold executives of banks responsible for loaning money to companies that then use that money in order to build things, fix infrastructure, push projects forward. And then the people that do the construction finish those projects and something happens with the project. There is some kind of a fault with a piece of equipment, something that was built. There is some kind of a spill. Then what she's trying to do is pin the tail on the financial donkey. In other words, that if you loan out any money and after the fact something that harms the public or harms the environment, then you should be held responsible for that. And that's not the way the system currently works. And of course, she can sponsor a bill to create a new piece of legislation that says that loaning anybody money for any reason, if something happens after you've loaned the person the money, and Timothy Sloan defended Wells Fargo's position because they do have people in-house that do cost-benefit analysis, and in addition to that, do an environmental impact study, and all of those were accomplished during this process. And so even if you were to do what's called due diligence, so the due diligence was done, but if somewhere down the line something goes wrong, then if the initial lender of the money in order to initiate that project is the one that's going to be held accountable for it, why would that be any different from maybe holding the donors to people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez primarily responsible for any damage that she does while she's in Congress? Just thinking. Thanks for watching. God bless. And now the DC Hammer Show is available as an audio podcast. Just go to Podcast Garden or iTunes and search for DC Hammer or News Narrative Analysis Associates, NNAA.